A piece of bread wrapped in German newspaper hidden inside a coat lining. December 1944, Auschwitz, 40 degrees below zero. 900 prisoners crammed into barracks built for 300. Max Liebermann, prisoner 174517, wakes to find his bunkmate Witold Pilecki burning with fever. Pilecki is different, speaks 5 languages, has officer's hands, no calluses despite months of labor. Liebermann doesn't know Pilecki arrived voluntarily in 1940, that he's a documented Polish resistance leader who infiltrated the camp to expose its horrors. All Liebermann knows is this man refuses to eat, clearly preparing to die. So Liebermann breaks his bread ration in half, slides it under Pilecki's blanket. No words exchanged. This continues for 2 weeks. Then in the 3rd week, Pilecki speaks. One sentence about buried diamonds in Warsaw. Liebermann thinks it's delirium. Keeps feeding him anyway. Pilecki grabs his wrist. I'm serious, remember this address. In the doorway, SS Guard Oskar Grunwald stands watching everything. Liebermann arrived at Auschwitz in late November 1944 after the Łódź ghetto was liquidated. Before the war, he owned a jewelry store on Nalewki Street in Warsaw. Modest operation, nothing fancy. When the Germans invaded in 1939, he buried what he could and hoped to survive. By 1944, survival meant invisibility. No skills the Germans wanted, no connections. Pure statistical luck that he hadn't been selected yet. Over 400,000 Hungarian Jews had arrived that summer alone, documented waves that overwhelmed the camp's capacity. Liebermann learned fast. Stay quiet. Stay unremarkable. Don't look guards in the eye. Then he met Pilecki in Block 11. The man had military bearing even while starving. Clean movements despite the chaos. Hands that had never done manual labor. Liebermann noticed immediately. This wasn't a merchant or a farmer. This was someone trained. Pilecki's fingernails were somehow still clean, a detail that made no sense unless he'd been assigned administrative work or had connections Liebermann couldn't see. Something about him didn't fit the pattern. Men who survive Auschwitz 4 years don't look like officers unless they got there by choice. What Liebermann didn't know, Witold Pilecki, was a legend before he became a ghost. In September 1940, Pilecki deliberately allowed himself to be captured during a Warsaw Street roundup. His mission was simple: infiltrate Auschwitz, build a resistance network inside, gather evidence of Nazi atrocities, and get the information out. For 2.5 years, Pilecki organized cells, smuggled reports, documented the gas chambers while working in camp administration. He escaped in April 1943, wrote detailed accounts that reached the Allies, accounts that were largely ignored. After the Warsaw Uprising collapsed in 1944, he was recaptured, this time as a regular prisoner, no special status, no protection. By December 1944, Pilecki was physically broken, spiritually exhausted. His mission was complete. The world knew what Auschwitz was, even if they chose not to act. Liebermann watched Pilecki refuse the watery soup, refuse the bread, refuse everything. Men who prepare for death have a particular stillness. Pilecki had it. His torn uniform pocket held something. Liebermann couldn't see what. A paper scrap, maybe. A photo. Something Pilecki touched when he thought no one was watching. Men who choose death usually have good reason. Late December brought typhus through Block 11 like fire through dry grass. Dozens died daily. The camp hospital was a death sentence disguised as care. Liebermann watched Pilecki's fever spike, watched him drift in and out of consciousness. No word spoken between them. On day 3, Liebermann broke his bread ration in half, slid the piece wrapped in newspaper under Pilecki's thin blanket. The newspaper was Völkischer Beobachter, October 1944 edition, Nazi propaganda rag used for wrapping and insulation. Liebermann didn't expect gratitude, didn't expect anything. His father taught him once, bread shared is bread blessed. Seemed like useless wisdom in Auschwitz, but old lessons die hard. Day 12, Pilecki opened his eyes, pushed the bread back. "Keep it," he whispered in Polish. Liebermann refused. "We both eat or neither." Pilecki studied him. Fever-bright eyes, skeletal face. "Why?" "Good question." Liebermann didn't have a good answer. "Because you're still breathing," he said. That seemed to satisfy something in Pilecki. Some calculation Liebermann couldn't see. 2 days later, Pilecki spoke again. Not delirious rambling, focused, deliberate. 17 Senatorska Street, Warsaw, basement, 3rd brick from the furnace. Liebermann thought it was fever, but the specificity stuck. Sometimes the smallest gesture unlocks the biggest doors. By early January 1945, Pilecki was 3 weeks into typhus. Shouldn't have lasted this long, most died in 10 days. But Pilecki was still here, growing weaker but coherent. One night, when the block was as quiet as it ever got, just coughing and men crying in their sleep, Pilecki whispered the rest. Diamonds. 40 of them. Pre-war Amsterdam cut. Worth $2 million in 1939 value, maybe more now. Buried before the invasion. His family's entire fortune converted to stones that could be hidden. "My wife, my children, they're gone," Pilecki said, voice like broken glass. "Use it to rebuild Poland. Tell people what happened here. Tell my story." Liebermann memorized the address. Didn't believe it was real. Fever dreams sound specific, but he memorized it anyway because dying men deserve that respect. Pilecki pulled out a paper scrap, wrote something in tiny print, held it so Liebermann could read. "For reconstruction, in memory of my family." WP then burned it in the small stove they were allowed for 2 hours each evening, turned it to ash while Liebermann watched. What Liebermann didn't see. 20 feet away, SS Guard Oskar Grunwald stood in shadow near the door. Grunwald was Austrian, not German. A deserter trapped in SS duty after a clerical error made escape impossible. He'd been planning his own exit for months, and he'd just watched Pilecki's lips move. Every secret whispered in Auschwitz had a witness. January 10th, 1945. Soviet artillery was 60 miles east, getting closer daily. The camp administration was burning records, preparing evacuation. Grunwald approached Liebermann during morning roll call. "I know what he told you," Grunwald said quietly in German. "Split it 50-50. I get you both out alive." Liebermann's German was decent, merchant-class education before the war. He understood perfectly, also understood what this meant. Grunwald had been watching, reading lips, maybe, putting pieces together. "He's still alive," Liebermann said. "I'm not negotiating over a man who's still breathing." Grunwald smiled. "Not friendly. Transactional. He'll be dead in 3 days. Then I kill you. Or we make a deal now." Grunwald showed him forged transfer papers, a Swiss passport with a fake name, civilian clothes hidden somewhere. The man had been planning this carefully. Liebermann did the math. Pilecki was dying. That was medical fact. Grunwald had power, keys, access, the ability to make people disappear. The diamonds were either real or they weren't. But if they were real, staying silent meant dying for nothing. 60-40, Liebermann said. "My favor, and you keep Pilecki alive until liberation." Grunwald considered. "Liberation's 2 weeks away, maybe 3. He won't make it. Then we both lose, Liebermann said. Grunwald laughed. Actually laughed. Deal. But if he talks to anyone else, you both die tonight. Thousands died in those final weeks before liberation. Documented systematic. Survival math in January 1945 always subtracted someone else. January 17th, 1945. The camp evacuation order came down. 60,000 prisoners forced to march west in minus 20 Celsius cold. The death marches they'd be called later. Documented history. Thousands froze, were shot, collapsed, and were left to die. Pilecki was too weak to walk. The selection list had his number on it, scheduled for special treatment, the euphemism for execution before evacuation. Grunwald moved fast. He'd bribed a camp doctor with cigarettes and a promise of protection during evacuation. Got Pilecki transferred to the medical hold barracks, a gray zone where the sickest were kept until someone decided their fate. Also got Liebermann assigned to food distribution commando, safer than the marches, lower profile, better chance. The morning of evacuation, Grunwald handed Liebermann a civilian coat. Heavy wool, German-made, hidden in the lining, the newspaper-wrapped bread. Liebermann's original piece he'd tried to give Pilecki weeks ago. Insurance, Grunwald said. Something to remember what this cost. Pilecki was briefly conscious when Liebermann came to say goodbye. Saw the coat, understood immediately. His eyes went distant. Don't become what saved you, he whispered. Liebermann didn't answer. What could he say? Then a problem. Hauptscharführer Müller, second in command of camp security, noticed Pilecki's transfer, noticed Liebermann's reassignment, started asking Grunwald questions. Müller was a party loyalist, true believer. Not someone who took bribes or made deals. Grunwald lied smoothly. Intelligence value, resistance connections, keeping options open. Müller didn't buy it. Told Grunwald he'd revisit this after evacuation. The more you save, the more you owe. January 24th, 1945. Soviet artillery was now audible. Distant thunder that meant the end was days away. Guards were destroying evidence, burning documents, executing witnesses. The camp was chaos. Müller interrogated Grunwald in the SS barracks while Liebermann worked food distribution 100 yards away. Why keep two specific prisoners alive? Intelligence value, fine. But you personally intervened. You bribed Dr. Schmidt, I want the truth. Grunwald stayed calm, gave the story he'd prepared. Pilecki was connected to the Polish underground, might be useful for negotiating surrender, might provide leverage with the Soviets. Müller didn't believe it. You're planning something. If you're planning to desert, I'll shoot you myself. Müller threatened both prisoners. He'd execute them tonight unless Grunwald explained what they really knew. Liebermann heard about this from another prisoner who overheard the fight, realized the situation. 3 people now hunting Pilecki's secret, and Pilecki was unconscious, couldn't confirm or deny anything. Müller ordered a search of Pilecki's bunk, found nothing. No papers, no maps, no clues. Because the secret wasn't written anywhere. It was in Liebermann's memory, and Liebermann had told no one except Grunwald. Müller made a mistake then, assumed the information was hidden somewhere in the camp. Something physical Pilecki had stashed. Müller ordered searches of admin buildings, warehouses, even the crematorium. Spent 2 days looking for something that didn't exist in any form he could find. Meanwhile, Liebermann watched and stayed silent. Grunwald watched Liebermann and did the same, and Pilecki drifted deeper into fever, toward the edge where memory and life both end. The best hiding place is always a memory. January 27th, 1945. Soviet troops arrived at Auschwitz, documented liberation date, Chaos everywhere. Guards fleeing, prisoners collapsing, fires burning records and evidence. Liebermann found Pilecki in the medical hold barracks. The night before, January 26th, Pilecki had regained consciousness briefly. Liebermann was there. Pilecki's last words weren't about diamonds or addresses. "Tell them what I did here? That's the payment," Liebermann promised. Knew he was lying even as he said it. Pilecki died an hour later. When Soviet soldiers entered the barracks the next morning, they found Liebermann sitting beside the body. Pilecki's hand held a newspaper clipping, the address written on it in tiny script after all. He'd kept it hidden in his mouth for weeks, wrote it out one final time before dying. Liebermann pocketed it before anyone else saw. That afternoon, Grunwald appeared in a Soviet uniform, stripped it off a dead soldier, spoke enough Russian to pass initial inspection. He found Liebermann near the main gate. "Müller?" Liebermann asked. Grunwald shrugged. "Found him dead near the wire. Shot during escape attempt." Convenient. Müller was the only other person who knew something was valuable. With him gone, only Liebermann and Grunwald knew about Senatorska Street. Grunwald handed Liebermann Soviet papers, forged but convincing. "We leave tomorrow. Warsaw's 300 kilometers. Road's clear." Liebermann looked back at the medical barracks. Pilecki's body was already being loaded with others for mass burial. No ceremony. No recognition. The man who voluntarily walked into Auschwitz to expose its horrors died one day before liberation, forgotten in a pile of anonymous dead. Freedom arrived 24 hours too late for the one man who earned it. February 1945. Liebermann and Grunwald traveled to Warsaw in a Soviet supply truck, bribing the driver with cigarettes. Warsaw was ruins, 85% destroyed. After the 1944 uprising, documented fact, entire city blocks reduced to rubble. Senatorska Street was a crater field. Buildings collapsed into basements. Fires had burned everything. They spent 3 days digging through debris where number 17 should have been. Used shovels stolen from a Red Army engineering depot. Worked dawn to dusk, found burned furniture, shattered glass, human remains they didn't look at closely. On the 4th day, they found the basement furnace, intact under tons of collapsed masonry. The 3rd brick from the furnace, exactly where Pilecki said, contained a metal box. Ammunition-grade steel, hermetically sealed, inside 40 diamonds, each one 2 to 3 carats, pre-war Amsterdam cut, certification papers included, dated 1938. Also inside, a handwritten note in Polish. "For reconstruction, in memory of my family. WP 1939. Pilecki had buried this 6 years ago before he voluntarily entered Auschwitz, before his mission, before everything. Grunwald held a diamond up to gray February light. "We did it." Liebermann read the note again. Grunwald didn't speak Polish, didn't understand what it said. "What's it say?" Grunwald asked. Liebermann made a choice. "For the finder. Payment for courage." Grunwald smiled. Bought the lie completely. They divided the diamonds there in the ruins. Grunwald took 18. Liebermann kept 22, plus the note and the newspaper wrapping he'd carried since Auschwitz. They agreed, never contact each other again. Deny knowing each other if anyone asks. Grunwald headed west toward Switzerland that night. Alpine routes were still open. Many Nazis escaped that way, documented. Liebermann watched him disappear into the rubble. Felt nothing. The first lie is always the easiest. March 1945, Berlin refugee camp. Liebermann discovered one of his diamonds was synthetic, lab-created, worthless except as sentimental value. He kept it in his pocket. Reminder that not everything valuable is real. Grunwald was already in Switzerland by then, probably converting his share into cash or gold. Liebermann stayed in Poland, had nowhere else to go. Used 3 diamonds to bribe Soviet officials for residency papers and work permits. The communists were rebuilding, needed capital, looked the other way when that capital came from ambiguous sources. By 1946, Liebermann had funded a steel factory in Łódź, employed 400 workers, all survivors, no questions asked about wartime history. Public perception, heroic survivor, generous employer, patriot rebuilding his country from ashes. Private reality, Liebermann couldn't sleep more than 3 hours a night. Wouldn't speak about Auschwitz, obsessed with news about Pilecki, checked every newspaper, every radio broadcast. In 1948, Liebermann learned Pilecki had been arrested by the communist government in 1947. Show trial in 1948. Accused of being a Western spy, executed by firing squad, buried in an unmarked mass grave. Documented historical fact. Pilecki's reports about Auschwitz, his voluntary infiltration, his resistance network, none of it mattered to the new regime. He was a liability, erased from history. Liebermann kept the newspaper wrapping from Auschwitz in his office, safe. Looked at it every morning. The Völkischer Beobachter masthead, October 1944. The bread had long since rotted away, but the paper remained. 1955. News reached Liebermann that Grunwald was found dead in Zurich. Suicide, the papers said. Single gunshot. But Soviet intelligence had been hunting former SS across Europe, documented operations. Liebermann wondered if someone connected them, traced Grunwald back to Auschwitz, back to January 1945. If so, how long before they came for him? The dead are easier to live with when they stay silent. April 1963, Warsaw, 18 years after liberation. The Polish government was slowly acknowledging Auschwitz survivors, holding ceremonies, awarding medals. Liebermann received Poland's Order of the Builders of People's Poland, highest civilian honor. The ceremony was massive. Hundreds of attendees, cameras, speeches about sacrifice and survival. Liebermann stood on stage holding the medal. Engraved date, January 27, 1945. His hands shook. He was 54 now, wealthy, respected, successful by every external measure. The steel factory employed over 1,000. He donated to hospitals, schools, survivor organizations. The prepared speech in his pocket said, "Luck, faith, and the kindness of strangers." But he couldn't deliver it. Spotted someone in the crowd, elderly man, scarred, watching him with intensity that felt familiar. After the ceremony, the man approached. "Pan Liebermann, I am Jerzy Pilecki, Witold's cousin." Liebermann's breath stopped. Witold wrote letters before he was captured, smuggled them out through the underground. He mentioned you, said you fed him, shared your bread. "I wanted to thank you." Jerzy handed him a photograph. Pre-war. Pilecki's family, wife, 2 children, all smiling. All dead by 1943. Liebermann couldn't take it. Physically couldn't make his hands accept the photo. "I don't deserve thanks," he said. Jerzy looked confused. "The government is finally investigating Witold's execution. They want witnesses, anyone who knew him. His mission is being rehabilitated. He'll be recognized as a hero." Liebermann felt something crack inside. Tell the truth or protect the secret. Expose what really happened or maintain the lie that built his empire. "I'll think about it," he managed. Jerzy smiled, handed him a card with a phone number. "Please do. Poland needs to remember people like Witold." After Jerzy left, Liebermann stood in the empty hall holding the medal. Thought about Pilecki's last words. "Tell them what I did here." He'd promised. Never did it. Built a fortune instead. Heroism is what you do. Cowardice is what you hide. Liebermann was 59. The factory was thriving. His name appeared in newspapers regularly. Government officials consulted him on industrial policy. He lived in a comfortable apartment in Warsaw's rebuilt city center. Never married. No children. At night, alone, he wrote a private memoir. Started in January 1968, finished by December. Documented everything. The bread, Pilecki's confession, Grunwald's deal, the diamonds, the false translation of the note, the fortune built on Pilecki's family treasure. Titled it simply, Confession. He locked it in a bank vault with instructions, publish after my death. Donate all assets to a Pilecki memorial fund. Until then, silence. He told no one. Continued his public life as the heroic survivor, the generous employer, the patriot. Continued checking the newspaper wrapping every morning. The Völkischer Beobachter, October 1944. Still legible, still a reminder. The government did rehabilitate Pilecki in 1989, 41 years after his execution. Recognized him as a hero of the Polish resistance. But by then, Liebermann was dead. He died in 1979, age 70, heart attack in his office. The memoir was discovered 3 months later by his lawyer. Published in 1981 during the Solidarity movement, when Poland was hungry for true stories about resistance and survival. Public reaction was divided. Some called Liebermann a pragmatist. He survived, used resources available, employed hundreds, rebuilt a destroyed country. Others called him a betrayer, stole a dying man's fortune, lied about it for 34 years, built wealth on another family's tragedy. The truth was probably both. Museums now display the newspaper wrapping in a glass case. Next to it, Pilecki's photograph, a copy of Liebermann's confession, and the synthetic diamond found in Liebermann's pocket at death. The diamond he kept as a reminder. The one worthless stone among the fortune. Some debts you can't repay. You can only confess them. The newspaper-wrapped bread sits in the Auschwitz Museum now, preserved behind glass, yellowed paper, Völkischer Beobachter masthead still visible, October 1944 edition. The bread itself is long gone, rotted away decades ago, but the paper remains. Next to it, enlarged photograph of Witold Pilecki in Polish Army uniform, 1939. Another photograph, Max Liebermann at his factory, 1960. Placard text explains the story in 3 languages, mentions the diamonds, mentions the confession, mentions the moral ambiguity that defined survival in places where morality itself was murdered. What the placard doesn't mention, Grunwald's name. His identity was never confirmed. Liebermann's memoir called him the Austrian Guard, and nothing more. Grunwald disappeared into Switzerland, died in Zurich, buried under a false name that was never connected to Auschwitz. History lost him. Only Liebermann knew the full truth, and Liebermann chose what to reveal. The synthetic diamond sits in a separate case, small label. Found in Liebermann's pocket at death 1979, origin unknown. But anyone who reads the confession knows. It was the reminder, the piece of the fortune that was fake, the one thing he kept to remember, that not everything valuable is real. Visitors to the museum stand in front of the bread display, try to imagine what it meant, try to understand the mathematics of survival when sharing food could save a life or cost your own. Try to picture 2 men in Block 11, December 1944, one dying, one choosing to split rations anyway. Some ask, would I have done the same? Others ask, would I have taken the deal with Grunwald? Nobody asks the harder question, what would I have done with the fortune after? The bread stays in its case, the photo stays beside it, and the legend grows with each retelling. Part truth, part reconstruction, part myth, because in the end, that's what legends are. True enough to be believed, impossible enough to be remembered, some debts you can't repay, you can only confess them,